Bert the Flirt, and other stories about my terminally ill mother. This is the story of my mother. It is the story about many mothers and their relationships with their children. In March of 1997, I received an urgent call from the East Coast. My 84-year-old mother was dying in an emergency room in Philadelphia. The emergency room physician encouraged me to pull the plug. "You don't want your mother on life support, do you?" I couldn't do it. It is nearly 2 years later and my mother prevails. I thank her for hanging around so that I can begin to sort out our relationship and come to love her purely and simply. On 3 occasions, I packed my black clothes for her funeral. Each time she was not ready and she rallied. It was an exceedingly difficult time for me. Every time I received a telephone call at an odd hour, my body froze. I went through life with both physical and emotional pain for nearly a year. Life is manageable once again. I continue to write about my mother and my experience of her terminal illness and the past that we shared. The hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was curled in a ball. She was hooked up to monitoring devices. The family had gathered to watch Mom die. I stood by her bedside, and my cousin and I comforted each other as we watched Mom. The cancer that had pressed on Mom's brain had caused a massive stroke. Her left side was paralyzed. Her mouth hung open, and her breathing was labored. My mother was dying. As a healer and only child, I didn't want to believe that my mother was dying. I touched her and stroked her clammy forehead. Is this what dying was all about? I stayed with Mom for 3 days, and she miraculously came out of her stupor. When she spoke, she looked across the room and saw my aunt, who is rather bossy and controlling. She squinted her eyes, and in a very unsteady voice, but with her usual sense of humor, asked, "Shirley? My Gestapo? Is that you?" I couldn't believe my ears, but since the rest of the family was present, there were witnesses to this bizarre recovery. Mom was going to live. I was ecstatic. Over the next weeks and months, progress was unpredictable. I received several frantic calls requesting my immediate return to the East Coast. Mom was in jeopardy a number of times, but always rallied. In an effort to experience and define my process of saying goodbye, I wrote a piece called "Be the Cow." It is a humorous attempt to explore the pain and memories associated with Mom. Be the cow. When I was a little girl, I lived in a Jewish ghetto with my mother and traveling salesman father. I never heard "wait for your father to come home" because he was only at home 2 or 3 days a week, and by the time he arrived, the crisis had probably passed. Besides which, I exhibited the behavior of a dutiful, intelligent, compliant daughter. Much of the time, however, a fire smoldered within me. My mother exhibited caring, loving, doting behavior, but I suspect that she had many fires smoldering in her too. It seemed to me that she got an inordinate pleasure out of my accomplishments. To say that she was trying to live through me would be fairly accurate. Her low self-esteem haunted both of us throughout our lives. When I excelled in school, she would remind me to call my Aunt Mildred to tell her how well I was doing. Bert cared about what people thought about her. She always asked me to call the relatives to say hello or to send birthday or get well cards. She herself was not very efficient about these things, but she expected me to promptly remember family occasions. Jokingly, one day I asked my mother if she wanted me to send my cousin Nina's poodle a birthday card. My mother has always had a very wry sense of humor, and she appreciated and tolerated mine well. Family was important to my mother. On weekends, when my father was home, we often had unannounced company. My mother would spy a familiar car from the living room window, and the SWAT team would immediately go into action. Gloria, put the newspapers away, make sure the guest towels are out, and put the papers under the sofa. And to my father, which later to my ear became a sort of litany. Art, hurry, get the fruit bowl. That proverbial fruit bowl saw much action. I don't know of any other hostess who put so much stock into a fruit bowl. My mother was an interesting hostess. She used to perk instant coffee for her guests. People had very strange reactions to this unusual brew. At first, guests did not know what to make of this taste sensation. They usually had strange expressions on their faces. You could hear the clicking of their tongues as they tried to figure out what it was they were imbibing. Other things are memorable about Mom. When I was in elementary school, she used to wake me up every morning by calling my name from her bed and announce in a low, loud morning voice, "Glor, it's time to get up." Now, this was no ordinary bugle call. This was my mother lazily, loudly calling for me to get up. What made her call so unique was that she sounded exactly like a cow when she called my name. Glor, glor, glor. With appropriate pauses in between, she sounded like a number of cows waiting to be milked. The sound became so overwhelming that I soon braved the non-sleep world and got ready for school. This 40-year scenario is as clear as it was the mornings it used to take place. My bedroom was done in beige wallpaper which had been hung upside down. The upside-down bamboo motif of the wallpaper looked like old men with crooked backs. I finally got used to it and just shared my bedroom with a bunch of old men with crooked backs. The nights, however, were sweetened by my healthy peeks out of my bedroom window. I longed to see our neighbor Paul as he prepared for bed. I was rarely lucky, but that didn't matter as much as the excitement of just looking over the ledge of the windowsill. My mother is in a care home now. She has had a recurrence of her cancer and is terminally ill. We have had an intense relationship over the years, and our differences have melted. I miss my mother already. She is 3,000 miles away, and I am consumed with thoughts of her. I am trying to remain with balance during these difficult times, and as part of my rest and relaxation, my friend Paula and I attended a mid-state fair. It was an unusual choice of recreation for both of us. Paula tends to like quiet times in the wilderness, and I was never much into Ferris wheels, corn dogs, and country music. As soon as we arrived, we watched a group of Western dancers. We then walked up and down the midway and observed many different vendors. An auctioneer's litany caught our ears as we sat in a grandstand watching the auctioning of 4-H livestock. Following our noses, we arrived in a barn that housed cows and bulls. The smell of the animals was a comfort, and we moseyed along like the other spectators. Suddenly, I heard this moan. It was a cow in the distance. The sound was so familiar. It sounded like my mother. Paula and I looked at each other, and in unison we walked toward the sound. When we found the cow that had been calling, I immediately felt a sense of relief and connectedness. The sound brought back endless memories of my mother. I wanted to cry. I could only think of my mother and her struggle to stay alive. I felt somewhat like a madwoman standing in a huge open barn talking to a cow. Could this be my mother incarnated? The cow, which I subsequently named Bee, kept calling my name. I tried to soothe Bee by telling her that everything would be all right. She just kept calling and calling. Paula wanted to move on and see other animals, or at the very least, stop watching her friend talk to a cow. I couldn't leave. This was my mother. I told Paula to come back in 10 minutes. I still had unfinished business. Bea continued to call for me, and I assured Bea that I would be right with her. I sat on a tack box and looked longingly at Bea. Her vacant stare looked just like my mother's when she was not understanding me. I still couldn't leave. I was pulled by the magnetism of Bea. Paula returned in 10 minutes. I told her I wasn't ready, and I continued my dialogue with Bea. It was like trying to say goodbye to someone who had just died. I hadn't had enough. I continued to stand and adore Bea. I was now saying my goodbyes. Suddenly I started to cry. I was really embarrassing myself now by profusely crying in this public barn. I quickly put on my sunglasses and cried some more. When I calmed down, I saw that a young girl who owned several cows was starting to feed them. She poured some food for Bea, and the spell was broken. Bea lowered her head to eat her food, and we no longer had eye contact. As she hungrily ate her food, I was free to leave. Bea will never know how important she was to me. I got to say an uncomplicated goodbye to my mother and tell her that I loved her. Letters to Mom. I feel so accepting and prepared for Mom's passing. I love her dearly now. Selfishly, I don't want her to go, but that is a personal preference. The piece that I have called Letters to Mom is a compilation of the ramblings I expressed at the request of my psychotherapist. These thoughts were written about 6 months after Mom's stroke. I was filled with rage, remorse, and much sadness. Mom was dying, and many of our lifelong issues loomed. This was by far the most difficult piece to create and present, but now that we have cried, screamed, laughed, and loved, I can look at my uncensored ravings without being torn to shreds. The first entry, dated 8/31/97, is just a day before my birthday. It begins. Dear Mom, I hate you, Mom. I hate you for my pain. Nothing was ever enough or good enough. I am tired of paying for your self-hatred. I won't be a victim anymore. I'm damaged, Mom. I'm damaged today, and I'm damaged forever. What happened to make me so desperately want to get away from you? I ran away at 6, and at 13 I wanted to get married. What was happening, Mom? You're a parasite in my gut. You eat at my innards and weigh on me like a colony of parasites. You were always in my face. Why, Mom? Why didn't you have a life of your own? You lied to me and made life a lie. When will the lies end? You tell me you love me. Why should I be so scared of someone who loves me? Something is wrong. What is it? 9/1/97. Mother, it is my birthday. I am tense, nervous, and preparing for battle. Do you realize that my entire life has been in preparation for battle? Maybe that is why the ordinary doesn't attract me. Why bother to mail a letter or go to the grocery store or the cleaners when death is just around the corner? The dailiness of life makes a soldier less vigilant, a very dangerous condition. I quietly lay in wait for the enemy. How did this happen? I was yours for all eyes to see, prancing and parading for you and the world. I only wanted you to love me. It was never that way. I always had to swim upstream. Life was never easy. I'm so bitter. I feel so cheated. I never experienced a kind, uncomplicated, loving mother. I'll make a deal with you, Mom. Let me be, and I'll let you be. There will be a standoff, no winners, no losers, just two enemies calling a truce. Why did you have to hate me so much? What happened to you? Why did you want me dead, Mom? Was life so painful for you? You used to say to me, I'll shake you within an inch of your life, but I'll never hit you. That's the way animals kill each other. They break each other's necks. Just say it. Say you hate me. Say I was a thorn in your side. Say your jealousy made you sick. I'm a wounded animal, Mom, running for my life, but this is the year I'll be free. 9/2/97, the day after my birthday. Mom, today I experienced my struggle for life. I want to ask you something, Mom. Did you ever want to put a pillow over my face and be finished with your jealousy? You were afraid you would smother me while you were nursing me. Was there a wish behind this fear? I know you didn't mean to harm me, but that really isn't good enough. I remember cursing your stupidity and vowing that I would never let your stupidity hurt me again. Did someone tell you that good, or is it guilty mothers, lay down and die for their children? Why did you behave that way? What terrible things were done to you? Was Anna cruel to you? You say you love me, Mom. You say you've always loved me. Really, Mom, is this love? You've told me I was an unwanted child and that I nearly killed you in childbirth. Is this true, Mom? I can feel your presence hovering over me. How do you want your peas, Glor? How do you want your mashed potatoes, Glor? Where do you want your peas? How do you want your peas? Why did you get so hung up on peas and mashed potatoes? I wonder why I never played with dolls. Maybe even then I didn't want to do to a doll what you did to me. When you went into the nursing home, I emptied your apartment and found old photographs of me. The sad face of me at 10 was astonishing. No life, no laughter, just stares and seriousness. I guess I'll never know what happened. I never played in the street or ran like a 10-year-old. I was always so serious. Do you know, Mom, I was 30 years old when I climbed my first tree. 9/5/97. It is only in the last year that I have been comfortable in a living space. Somehow my life was so threatened that I could never stay still. A moving target is always harder to hit. That's a hell of a way to grow up. Keep moving and you'll never get me. How many middle-aged women do you know who have tents in the trunks of their car? That is very odd, Mom. I knew that I would always have a safe place of my own if my tent were in the trunk of my car. Feeling unsafe is so awful. Someone can get you at any time and intrude upon you. There are no boundaries. Nothing is ever okay. Nothing is ever enough. And nothing can just be. You poor thing, Mom. What was your life like that made you so intrusive? Didn't anyone trust you? 9/7/97. Mother, do you know what our relationship has done to me regarding men? The men I choose never see me. If I am not acknowledged, I am safe. If I am invisible, they can't see me to hurt me. I am boiling at the moment, rageful. Aren't you proud of what you've done? Aren't you proud of what you created? They say the embryo and soul picks the parents. Why did I ever pick you? What a challenge. Why do I have to have such a hard life? My belly is so swollen with parasites and bile. The sick feeling I have in my mouth comes from hate and anger. What is this all about, Mom? My core hurts. 9/8/97. Dear Mom, it is so hard processing this experience. I have no real interest in looking any further at my pain, and yet it persists and persists. I feel like a bee that can never light. I can never find my flower to nourish me. It is so unsettling. I wonder if that's what you experienced. 4 days in winter. I had a very stormy time adjusting to the fact that my mother was dying. As you have already heard, so many old, unresolved issues reappeared. I just wanted to love her and let her know how much I loved her. I was now finished with my rage. 3 months after my birthday, during Thanksgiving week, I had several conversations that eventually healed our relationship. Day 1. Chit-chat and other nuisances. I was scared. My mother was deteriorating in a nursing home, and I was afraid to see her. My older daughter kindly agreed to accompany me so I wouldn't have to face the reality of my mother's terminal illness alone. I was afraid to see the once fiery, lively, funny woman slouched in a wheelchair. We entered the lobby in the nursing home and signed our names in the guest book. The corridors were nondescript. When we reached the TV lounge where Mom was being housed, we looked out upon a huge sea of faces. Seeing the undifferentiated bodies and faces was like looking into a newborn nursery. They all looked alike. My daughter said, "Look, Mom, there's Grandma. She has the pink turban on her head." Sure enough, there was my mother. It was hard to recognize her. The wheelchairs were lined up 3 deep in a semicircle. The chairs were all positioned so that if one cared to, one could possibly see the TV screen. I later learned from the activities director that everyone likes The Price is Right, and therefore viewing The Price is Right is considered an activity. Disengaging Bert from the scene was like cutting cattle. We had to rearrange several wheelchairs in order to get Bert out of the herd. With this accomplished, Bert looked up at her great-granddaughter and smiled. She recognized me and asked me how long I was staying. I pulled up a chair and started to communicate with her. Our conversation was very stilted. It was as profound a conversation as you would have with someone who was in line with you at the supermarket. Nothing was being said. I didn't know where to look or how to be. I felt uncomfortable and my heart was heavy. I looked around the room and in the other patients, also saw the remains of what used to be. My mother never wanted it to be like this. She had a dread of nursing homes, and when she was younger, she literally used to shudder at the thought of being in a care home. I studied my mother as she sat in her wheelchair. She had been dressed in a bright purple sweatsuit, pink turban, white socks, and white stretch slippers. She would have been appalled if she had any awareness of what she looked like. I asked Mom if she wanted a wig instead of a turban, and she answered, "What for?" The gods had compassion on us. My granddaughter started to cry, and after a short time, we mercifully had to leave. Day 2, the day of forgiveness. On my second visit, my son dropped me off at the nursing home. He was going to return in 1 hour at 6 p.m. It was a cold, black New Jersey night. This was the night that I had diligently prepared for. This was the night that I was going to bare my soul and tell my mother about my pain, sorrow, dismay, and grief, loss, terror, and gratitude. I briskly walked Mom from the TV room into her own room. I had a mission. I positioned her wheelchair close to her bed and pulled up another chair so that I could begin the unburdening. "Mom, I forgive you for any pain you've caused me. I'm badly damaged. I have been running my entire life. I feel no stillness. I release you, Mom. Do not stay on earth because you think I am holding you. I have no more unfinished business." As I spoke these words, I started to cry. I was crying profusely, and my mother became alarmed. She suddenly became lucid and said, "Gloria, get a hold of yourself." I was taken aback. Her lucidity was very much in character. My mother could never tolerate the expression of strong emotions. My mother's words just intensified my sadness. I continued to sob. My entire body was racked with sobbing. I felt a need to physically be closer to my mother. I placed my head into her lap. I took my mother's hand and placed it on my head. She began to stroke me with her thumb. I felt my mother's love. She kept softly moving her hand. It was the first time in my life that I received her love without fear. She couldn't hurt me anymore. I moved from my mother's lap to her feet. I kept repeating, "I love you, Mommy, I love you, Mommy, I love you, Mommy." This was the first time in my life that I could call my mother Mommy without fear. I experienced my own vulnerability. I looked at my mother with tears streaming down my face, and I said to her, "Mom, say I love you." She looked a little bewildered, and then her gaze focused on me, and she said, "I love you very, very much." We were suspended in time and space. I was aware of the fact that my son would be returning shortly. I stayed with my mother until it was time to meet him. I couldn't bear to take her back to the TV room after this beautiful exchange. I parted, exiting from her room with the honor accorded to a true guru. With my hands in a reverent pose, I walked backward out of my mother's room. The corridors outside of her room were almost non-existent. I glided through the maze and entered the black New Jersey night to wait for my son. My body was throbbing with energy. I couldn't stay still. I began pacing and moving around the parking lot in a clockwise direction. Instinctively, I was moving as an Orthodox Jew after a period of mourning. Traditionally, the family members walk around the block after a 7-day mourning period. I could hear the mourner's prayer going round and round in my head. My son whipped into the parking lot with his small Jeep. I couldn't talk about the visit. It was too fresh and intense. Day 3. The hot fudge sundae and other mysteries of life. Mom always liked to have one of 3 things when she was not feeling well. She would crave pickled herring or smoked salmon when her stomach was queasy, or when she was blue, she would crave a hot fudge sundae. I decided the situation called for a hot fudge sundae. I went to a local deli and they agreed to make Mom a wonderful sundae. I told the woman who was in charge that my mother was very ill and I would appreciate any help she could provide. She made the proper inquiries. Do I want whipped cream, nuts, and a cherry? I wasn't sure if my mother could handle the nuts, but we went for it anyway. I had borrowed my son's Jeep, and this time I whipped over to the care home. Mom was once again in the lineup. I was getting good at cutting cattle, and she was in her room in moments. With the door closed, I began feeding Mom her comfort food. She seemed to be enjoying herself. She just kept eating and eating. I became worried that she was going to be sick if she continued. When I decided that Mom had had enough, I wheeled her out of the room, and we took the cook's tour of the nursing home. It was pretty bad. I showed Mom the fish in the aquarium. I never thought I'd be wheeling my mother around showing her fish in an aquarium. After zipping around the depressing corridors several times, I thought it might be pleasant to sit in the chapel with Mom. Hospitals always seem to have chapels, and that is one of the sanest places to be when one is in a hospital setting. Without too much of a search, we found the chapel. I wheeled Mom around and we looked at the prayer shawls and prayer books. A 3-foot menorah cast a yellow light in the room. I positioned Mom so that the light provided a backdrop for her silhouette. She looked youthful. There were no lines on her face. She looked out into space with a blank stare, and then she looked at me and said, "It has taken us so long." I started to cry again, but this time the tears just trickled down my face. I held my mother's hand. Her skin was soft. "Mom, I don't want you to die. Can't we be friends just a little longer?" I kept rubbing her skin. Her nail polish was chipped, and her blue veins were raised and translucent. Her skin was my skin. There was no longer a barrier between us. I loved my mother, and my mother loved me. Our battle was over, and we both won. Mom was right. It had taken a long time. What would our lives have been like if we had not battled? We each longed for the other, and we were not available. What a waste. I had to take Mom back. My kids were waiting for me. Mom was very lucid now. I wanted to say a special goodbye to my mother. I suspected that it was the last time that I would see her alive. I couldn't leave her in that god-awful TV lounge. I asked the aide if she would put Mom into her bed for me so that I could tuck her in and say a final good night. It was a very emotional moment for me. The aide said that she would be happy to do that, but that she would not be free to do this for another 30 minutes. I had to leave and told Mom that I would return later that night. In the clear, authoritative voice that was so familiar, my mother said one word: "Don't." I nearly fell over. She didn't want me to go to the trouble of returning. Hearing this commotion, another aide volunteered to prepare Mom for bed. As we waited for the aide to arrive, Mom said, "Pretty soon it will be over. I won't do this again." I looked at her and I said, "I know, Mom, pretty soon." I told my mother that she had cancer. She looked surprised. Her large brown eyes suddenly became clear and alert when I told her about the cancer. She placed her outstretched fingers over her heart. Her disbelief lasted only a moment, and then she went back into a reverie. I asked my mother outright if she wanted to die. She came out of her reverie, looked at me squarely, and in her majestic, magnetic voice said, "Not necessarily." Mom has always had a way with words. We waited in silence for the aide to arrive. The aide asked me to leave the room while she prepared my mother. The aide beckoned to me as I waited in the corridor. "Your mother is ready to see you now." I sat in a chair next to the bed. Mom's face was turned away from me. She was wearing purple checked flannel pajamas. I never did like those PJs. I stayed with her and just loved her. My soft mommy was at peace. I called my kids to say I was running late, and my son-in-law suggested that I return the next day before leaving for the airport. I felt a tremendous sense of relief. I just couldn't say goodbye for the last time under these circumstances. I returned to Mom and told her that I would see her the next day. She looked bright and pleased and said, "Oh, good." Day 4, my mother, the Tai Chi master. I was getting to know the routine by now. Sign in and find your mother among the faces in the TV lounge. This surely was going to be the last time, or was it? I wheeled Mom out to the reception area. We sat and watched the wind blow the leaves on the trees. These were quiet moments with Mom, a little too quiet. The woman who bounded into the reception area announced that the Tai Chi class was starting at 10:30. This was my mother's cup of tea, or it would have been only 9 months ago. I chanced it. "Mom, let's go to the Tai Chi class." She agreed, and we first signed in with the activities director. She wanted to know all about Mom. I explained how just 9 months ago, Mom was coloring her own hair, playing mahjong once a week, supporting her favorite organization, driving her own car, and transporting her boyfriend to his doctor's appointments. The 10:30 hour approached, and I wheeled Mom into the elevator, where we were taken to the second floor for the class. About 20 patients were arranged in a circle, and a vivacious Tai Chi teacher commented on energy flows and how that affects health. The Tai Chi instruction began, and the teacher tried to help my mother follow instructions. Create a ball of energy with your hands. Make the ball move in a circle. The teacher held my mother's hands. With the cancer pressing on Mom's brain, it is impossible for her to consistently take instruction. I sat and looked at my lovely mother trying so earnestly to move a ball of energy. A slight commotion behind me caused me to turn. A clerk from the first floor was looking for me. The driver who was going to take me to the airport had arrived. It was a fitting ending in some ways. My mother was actively engaged in life. Although it was a little forced, it was typical of what my mother would have done before her illness. I would have liked to have spent endless hours with her, but that was not possible. My driver had arrived, and I had a plane to catch. The visit had come to an end. My trip to the airport was a reflective one. I had a sense of peace. I didn't want this to be my last visit with Mom, but if it had to be, I am filled with gratitude for the way we were able to come together. I love my mommy, and my mommy loves me. The Second Coming. I continued to chronicle my contacts with Mom. This piece was written 1 year after Mom's stroke. March 28, 1998. I did not look forward to seeing my mother. I love her dearly now without complications, and I couldn't bear thinking about her in the lineup at the convalescent hospital. The corralling of patients in the TV lounge borders on the obscene. My darling children eased my pain and sense of foreboding by accompanying me on my visit. I dressed for the occasion by wearing a flowery cherry red silk blouse that had a bow at the neck. Somewhere I had learned that the best defense is a good offense. We found Bert and wheeled her out of the TV lounge into a seldom-used sunroom. The smell of urine had not permeated this space. Thank God for small favors. It was lunchtime, and my son brought Bert's pureed meal to the sunroom. I couldn't feed my mother. Andrew, however, was used to the scene, and he shoveled food into Bert as if she were a baby. She dribbled some bright orange substance on her sweater. They had forgotten to send a bib with the meal. I got some water to remove the substance, and we left shortly after Bert finished eating. My daughter and I returned the next day, and I was expecting an equally appalling episode. We arrived at mealtime, and I steeled myself to help my mother with her food. She seemed to do well with her bread and butter, and I suspected that she could handle finger food. I voiced my observation to the dietitian, and my mother started to feed herself with her newly served finger food. She was doing well, and I only assisted with the ground meat. I placed a spoonful of ground meat in her mouth, and she made a familiar clicking sound with her tongue. She was also grimacing. When she finished clicking and grimacing, she turned to me, "Glor, this is too salty." Oh, what a pleasant lament. Everything was always too salty for Mom. Complaining and being her old self, I just laughed at this indomitable woman who happens to joyfully be my mother. Mom was back. May 15th, 1998. I saw my mother yesterday. She was slumped in her wheelchair, wearing the same lavender sweatsuit she wore 8 weeks ago on my last visit. Her hair is growing, and it has the look of wizened old negroid hair. I tapped her on her shoulder, and she looked at me with a vacant stare. "Hi, Mama, how are you?" She nodded without too much expression. I wanted to take my mother to a park and have her see some greenery. She always loved greenery. I guess I'm a better daughter than I thought. I made my request at the nurse's station. They were concerned because no one from the home would be accompanying me. I had no fears. This was my mother. As soon as we pulled out of the driveway, she came alive. She looked around, and as if no time had elapsed, she said, "Oh, it is so good to be out." My mother always liked to go, do, and be. Her head moved with slow, jerky movements as she looked out of the window. We arrived at the park, and I opened the car door for her. She doesn't walk, but she could begin to feel the openness of the air. The breeze was blowing across the river and onto her face. She looked like a young woman whose face was being caressed by her lover's hand. We sat in utter silence for a very long time. When the sun started to shift, I moved the car. Shade was better for my mother. We had a slightly better view of the river, and the large maple trees shaded us. I pointed to a bird in the tree. Mom said she saw it, but I didn't think she did. After 3 hours, I asked Mom if she wanted to leave. She said, "Whatever you like." When we returned to the home, the same burly aide who had put her into the car now transferred her from the car to her wheelchair. I have never loved my mother as purely as I do now. She continues to be the best teacher I've ever had. May 18th, 1998. Mom was sleeping today when I went to visit her. She was curled up on her bed with a slight scowl on her face. I called her name, but she didn't respond. I gently tugged on her shoulders. She did not respond. I did wonder for a moment if this was it. It had almost become familiar now, knowing that at any moment it could be Mom's last. My entire body used to clench with the thought. Every early morning telephone call used to make my stomach churn. I am now more prepared than ever. When I settled into this visit, I stroked her hair and simultaneously held my 4-year-old grandson on my lap. I saw and felt 4 generations of my mother's blood. It was a comfort. Bert the Flirt. Toward the end of September 1998, nearly a year and a half after Mom's stroke, I experienced tremendous anxiety regarding Mom. Her September 23rd birthday loomed, and I was afraid that Mom might decide to die on or around her birthday. On many occasions, Mom has reached out to me psychically when she was fearful. I was strongly experiencing her panic. Mom's birthday came and went, and Bert chose to live. I'm so grateful to Mom for having hung around this long. I'm grateful to my mother for many things. My mother has given me many gifts. One of them is my ease with the opposite sex. Bert is a flirt. Always has been, always will be. She believes in the necessity of a man in her life, and even as she braves her last years, she is true to form. She celebrated her 85th birthday this week. Her 92-year-old boyfriend, Morris, continues to see her regularly. Although she is usually slumped in a wheelchair and her paper diapers give her a slightly enlarged look, her manicured fingers still move delicately when she feeds herself her finger foods. Mom lights up in the presence of men. She used to flirt with cashiers at the supermarket, gas station attendants, physicians, her grandson, and, of course, Morris. Morris used to receive very special attention. Feeding Morris became a very essential activity for Mom. I wonder if Mom knew about the ancients who practiced tantric yoga and acknowledged the importance of delectable goodies in sexual practices. Feeding Morris actually became an obsession with Mom. Mom had, as she would say, wrenched her back and required bed rest. She was in an intense pain and called my office to say that her pain was excruciating. I canceled my appointments for the rest of that day, and when I arrived at Mom's, sure enough, she was writhing in pain. No position was comfortable for her. Every move was punctuated by a loud oy vey, oy vey, oy vey. My heart went out to Mom until she said in a clear, unpained voice, "Glor, what time is it?" When I answered 4 o'clock, she said, "Oy vey, Morris will be here in 2 hours and dinner isn't ready." "Glor, I want you to make meatballs for Morris." "Wait a minute, Mom. I canceled my appointment so that I could take care of you, not make meatballs for Morris." "Well, you are taking care of me by making meatballs for Morris." "Mom, that doesn't make any sense." "That doesn't matter. Just make the meatballs." Mom proceeded to give me her recipe for making meatballs. Each instruction was punctuated with a loud oy vey. "Glor, go into the kitchen and take your rings off and wash your hands. Oy vey. Now take the meat out of the refrigerator, but do not touch the meat." "Mom, how can I take the meat out of the refrigerator if I'm not going to touch it?" "Glor, don't be fresh. Don't touch the meat. Use a fork. If you touch the meat, you'll damage the meat. Use the fork." I fussed with the meat and heard moans from the bedroom. Mom was trying to turn on her side, and she continued with the recipe. "Oy vey. Very slowly add a can of tomatoes. Oy vey. Okay, Mom, don't worry about the tomatoes. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of it." "But oy vey, if you add the tomatoes too quickly, it will burn." "After the tomatoes start to simmer, oy vey, add a quart of ginger ale." "A quart of ginger ale, Mom? Oy vey, what are you talking about?" "Ginger ale will give the sauce a sweet and sour taste. Oy vey." Mom looked at me with pleading eyes. "Gloria, just add the ginger ale and don't touch the meatballs. Oy vey." I will never, oy vey, forget my mother's recipe for meatballs. She was always dedicated to delectability and sensuality. Mom always respected me as a healthcare practitioner, and being the sexual, sensual creature she is, she took me aside one day and said that she had to talk to me about something. Although she and Morris were being sexual, she was experiencing vaginal dryness, and because she valued my opinion, she wanted to know if there was anything she could take for her condition. I recommended an herb that is known to stimulate estrogen production. Mom is a very good patient, and she followed my instructions and took her herbs dutifully. About 2 weeks later, she took me aside again and said that we needed to talk again. Mom had a new problem. She had positive results from the herb and now reported that she was so wet that she needed a diaper. I suppose the situation called for a response, but at this point I had none. On another occasion, my son found a pair of men's pajamas on Mom's bed. When he held them up and asked who owned the pajamas, Mom responded by saying that Morris had been sick and he slept over. When he found the second pair of pajamas, Mom just said that Morris had been very sick. I sit in the sun now and muse about the mysteries of Mom. How and where did she learn to be a courtesan? Will she live another year, another day? I sense no fear or trepidation. She will live yet another day. Mom and Big Sur. Mom's story wouldn't be complete without my telling of Mother's Day 1998, when I decided to take my poor, hard-working mother to Northern California. My mother had come to visit me to help me take care of the elderly residents in the holistic care center that I owned and operated. I cannot say exactly what contributed to the chaos that we experienced as a result of Mom's presence, but somehow things ran a lot less smoothly than usual. After 10 days, my friend Doug and I decided to take Mom to Big Sur. She needed a little R&R. It was a last-moment's decision to spend Mother's Day in this resort area. It was difficult to find appropriate accommodations. Because Mom snores, it was even more difficult to find suitable accommodations. We were unable to find 2 separate rooms. However, we were assured when we made the telephone reservation that the available room was a very large, lovely one. We explained the situation regarding Mom's snoring, and once again we were reassured that the room was partitioned in such a way so that we wouldn't be bothered by Mom's snoring. It was an idyllic trip. Mom was safely ensconced in the back of the station wagon. Douglas slowly drove along the scenic highway, and I had the luxury of being a passenger. Mom looked up to the hills and saw that the hillside was dotted with cattle. She exclaimed as if she were a 6-year-old, "Glor, where did the cows come from?" I answered in a controlled voice, "Mom, I have no idea." The momentary silence was broken by yet another question. "Glor, why is the sky so blue?" I once again answered, "Mom, I have no idea." We continued on our journey, soaking up the beauty of the scenic highway leading to Big Sur. When we arrived at our destination, the Cozy Oaks Motel looked very inviting. After we registered, we went to our designated room and found that the promised accommodations were not exactly what we had anticipated. Mom was tired after the 6-hour drive and decided to turn in early. Douglas and I decided that we would take a walk while Mom prepared for bed. When we returned from our walk, we found Mom sound asleep and snoring loudly. Oh well, it was her Mother's Day celebration, and the snoring could only be a harbinger of things to come. Douglas and I did manage to get some sleep that evening. We used a few extra pillows to act as buffers against Mom's snoring. We slept fitfully, and when we awoke in the morning, Mom was staring at us with large, large brown eyes. She patiently waited for us to awaken. When she saw that we had our eyes open, she looked very serious and said, "Glor, my neck is paralyzed. You have to fix it." I had difficulty refusing her request, and yet at the same time, I knew that if I touched her, it would be the kiss of death. If I gave in to my mother's neuroses and her muscle spasm now, I would be hooked for the rest of the weekend. After a moment of soul-searching, I decided to lightly touch my mother's neck. She was delighted. She looked like a queen who was attended to by her court healer. Predictably, Mom responded to my touch and was able to move her neck freely. Oh, the wonders of the human touch. It was going to be a great day after all. After a light breakfast, Mom's spasms returned. I asked if she wanted to go to a hospital or if she wanted to go home. Mom said that she didn't want to cause any problem, and so she elected to go home. We packed up the car and sadly prepared to leave Big Sur. Mom sat in the back of the old Datsun wagon, and we placed pillows around her head and neck and prepared for the long ride home. As soon as we pulled into the highway, Doug and I heard a loud moan from the back of the wagon. "Mom, what is it? Are you okay?" She replied in a very stoical voice, I'm fine, nothing's wrong." We continued along the winding road. Every time we passed a sharp curve, the silence was punctuated with a loud moan, followed by, I'm fine." There was no way that I could comfort Mom. She did not want another position, another pillow, another anything. Around noon, we decided to stop for lunch. Mom was hungry and managed to briskly walk the 200 feet from the car to the restaurant. She showed no evidence of paralysis at this time. She brightened as she took in her surroundings. The restaurant was quaint and promised home-cooked meals. Once we were seated, Mom ordered her usual egg white scramble, She likes her egg whites beaten with a teaspoon of water per egg, 2 shakes of pepper, and 1 shake of salt. Her toast was eventually burned to her satisfaction, and of course the coffee was never quite hot enough. Douglas and I were stunned by her rapid recovery. Her appetite, her stamina, her zest, her desire to prevail was astonishing to us. After completing a 3-egg white scramble, 3 pieces of toast, Mom's eye turned to the counter where she spied a homemade apple pie. She beckoned to the waitress, who by now approached the table like a cowering dog. What abuse was going to be hurled on her next? Mom flashed one of her charming smiles and asked for a piece of pie. At Mom's insistence, both Douglas and I tasted the pie. Mom then took a bite and announced that the pie was too salty. She took another bite and started to make a clicking song. Yes, this pie is definitely too salty. It was at this point that Douglas lost patience. He got up and announced that he would wait in the car. Mom was concerned that she had offended him and asked, "What's the matter with Douglas?" I smiled and answered, "The same thing that is wrong with you. He is in a lot of pain." Mom didn't get my sarcasm and just finished her pie. I used the restroom before we left the restaurant and told Mom that we had another 2 hours of winding highway before we would be able to stop again. She considered using the restroom and then, with tremendous resolve, said, "I'll hold it, Glor. You go." "Are you sure, Mom?" "Yes, I'll hold it." I was already feeling sorry for Mom. This was definitely a bad decision. We re-entered the car and braced ourselves for another torturous 2 hours. Mercifully, after 30 minutes, Mom fell asleep, and the new quietness was as soft as freshly fallen snow. We traveled soundlessly for the next hour and a half, and as we approached the city limits, we heard stirring in the back of the car. "Glor, are we almost there? I have to use the bathroom." "Yes, Mom, we are almost there. It will be another half hour." Mom started to moan again. This time it was a combination moan that took into account Mom's full bladder and her painful neck. The moans were increasing. I begged Mom to hold on for just a little longer. "You can do it, Mom." Eventually, Douglas pulled the car up to the house. We helped Mom out of the car, and in her own pained way, she made a beeline for the bathroom. Now, however, Bert was experiencing painful spasms in her back. She called from the bathroom, "Help, help!" Mom was trying to pull her panties down, but she couldn't do it. I rushed into the bathroom and just in time pulled her panties down. She plopped onto the toilet seat and the floodgates opened. When Mom returned to the bedroom, Douglas tried to comfort her. "Bert, now you just have to relax. You're going to be okay." Mom sat regally in the overstuffed Queen Anne's chair and then called for me. "Glor, Glor." "Yes, Mom. I think that you should call 911. "Okay, Mom, whatever you say." The emergency operator asked me a few questions after I explained that Mom had a pain in her neck. She wanted to know if the pain was going down Mom's arms. "Mom, do you have any pain in your arms?" "Yes, I have a little pain in my arms." "Are you short of breath?" "A little, but I'm fine. I reported to the operator that Mom had some pain in her arms and some shortness of breath. She said that she would have someone on the scene immediately. Within moments, we heard sirens blaring. I thought there was a fire in our neighborhood. The sirens got louder and louder, and when they were directly in front of the house, I realized that the large hook and ladder that was parked in front of the house was part of the emergency response team. I answered the doorbell, and 5 firemen entered the house. They were fully prepared with oxygen equipment, heart monitors, blood pressure cuffs, and the proverbial rubber gloves. Mom was regally seated on her Queen Anne's chair. Again she flashed one of her smiles as the emergency crew rushed to save her. She quickly assessed the scene and, in a charming, clear, eloquent voice, asked, "Did you guys have a hard night?" Well, the guys were more than overwhelmed by my mother's jovial greeting. They expected to see someone in major distress, and instead they found a cheerful woman seated in her Queen Anne's chair. They listened to Mom's heart and took her blood pressure. When everything appeared to be normal, they shook their heads, packed up their equipment, and quickly left. They also informed me that the paramedics would shortly arrive on the scene. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. This time, only 2 paramedics urgently raced into the bedroom. Mom was still seated on her throne, and she smiled graciously, and she said once again, "Hi, guys. Did you have a hard night?" The guys once again listened to Mom's heart and took her blood pressure. I was waiting in the living room while they examined Mom. The suspense was mounting. When would I finally lose patience and explode? Mom emerged from the bedroom with a paramedic on each arm. The paramedics walked slowly with Mom as they informed me that they would be taking Mom to the hospital. The procession proceeded with a certain regalness. They asked if I would be joining my mother at the hospital. I told them that I would be following shortly. I knew that if I left, my patience would give out. I am not a violent person, but at this point I didn't trust my ability to control myself. I closed the door and began to recite my mantra. I asked for the strength to get through this ordeal. Just as I was feeling a connection with a divine force, the doorbell rang again. It was my mother with a paramedic on each side of her. "We told your mother that it would cost $450 to go to the hospital, and she said that you would be able to take her." I uttered a silent scream and wondered why I was ever born. Douglas came to the rescue and took over. He knew that I was at my wit's end, and he just looked at Bert and said, "Right this way." Mom did an about face, and this time Douglas and I slowly walked Bert to the car. They were waiting for Mom when she arrived at the emergency room. Mom was seated before the admissions clerk, and she seemed to enjoy every minute of the process of fumbling for her identification cards. Mom was finally admitted, and x-rays were taken of her back and neck. While I was waiting for the results, a nurse came out of the hallway to tell me that my mother was a very good patient. The doctor who reviewed Mom's x-rays found no damage, and he sent her home with Valium. The Valium immediately released the muscle spasm, and Mom believed that a certified miracle had occurred. I didn't have the heart to tell her that her recovery would not be considered an official miracle. Mom stayed in California for an additional week. She had a full recovery, and so did we. Stories about Mom became even more important as she approached the end of her life. She took a turn for the worst in February of 1999. The final chapter. Mom broke her hip in the beginning of February. She had surgery, and even though the surgery was successful, she began to lose her will to live. In March, Mom started to refuse meals. She wouldn't even open her mouth to have her teeth brushed. My children and I decided that we did not want her to have a feeding tube. She became weaker and weaker, and her breathing became very labored. She received intravenous feedings and oxygen. Her sense of humor prevailed even in death. On April Fool's Day, 1999, Mom peacefully passed. Her cosmic April Fool's Day prank included having the hearse have a flat tire on the way to the cemetery. Mom was almost late for her own funeral. The following is an account of her passing. I arrived at the convalescent hospital after an all-night flight from Hawaii. My younger daughter, in her most diplomatic manner, suggested that I go straight to the hospital from the airport. I arrived around 7:30 in the morning. Mom was having a difficult time breathing. I suspected that this time Mom was really dying. For a month or so prior to this episode, my healing seemed to be more significant and dramatic. I thought Mom was helping me from the other side, even though she hadn't as yet passed. I sat at my mother's side, watching her labored breath. Bert had had enough. She appeared ready to die. The skin on her face was stretched over her bones. She looked like the face in the Munch painting, The Scream. I kept thinking of the Holocaust survivors and their bone-thin beings. Mom probably weighed about 85 pounds. The remarkable thing about her face was that her nose and ears were both shrinking to pre-aging size. Her nose actually looked delicate, and the formerly elongated lobes of her ears had shrunk to a youthful size. Her mouth was open, and her teeth looked brown. Her mouth looked as if she were already dead. So many times over the past 2 years, Mom had pulled out of her crises. I was afraid to touch Mom for fear of interfering with her process. After a time, however, I just didn't care, and I held her hand. I hoped that I could help her with her labored breathing. The nurses and my children believed that Mom was waiting for me to arrive. I wasn't convinced of that. I didn't know what she was waiting for, but I didn't think it was my physical presence. After several hours, I left and slept for a few hours. My older daughter was afraid Mom might die while I was sleeping. She was a little miffed because I had decided to sleep. I knew that Mom wouldn't pass while I was sleeping. I also knew that I would need every ounce of strength I could muster to truly be of service to my mother and my family. I slept deeply and without any regrets. I returned to the convalescent hospital later. There was still no change. Mom was still having difficulty breathing. When I returned the next morning, the nurses told me that she had been given morphine, and so her breathing was slightly easier. She was propped in an upright position, and her head was slightly arched. She looked very uncomfortable to me. The nurses and I repositioned her, and although she still looked awkward, I realized Mom was dying, and it really didn't matter very much. I sat to Mom's right side this time. I held her hand without any concern. I sat for hours with my eyes closed, and I just held her hand. My daughter, son, and son-in-law were in and out of the room at different times. I opened my eyes and acknowledged them. I had brought some anointing oil with me and put some oil on the space between Bert's eyebrows. I touched her and rubbed the spot, and then did the same thing to the space between my eyebrows. I wanted the connection between us to be even stronger. When the rabbi came to pay his respects, I relinquished my position, and Rabbi Iran, an unaffected, sincere community rabbi, sat next to Bert. He said several prayers as Bert continued her labored breathing. The rabbi looked at me, and because I could almost see the turmoil in my mother's chest, I asked Rabbi Iran if he could tell Bert one more thing. I said, "Please assure my mother that I am all right and that my career is taking off." The rabbi turned to Bert and embellished on my statement. He said, "Bert, stop worrying about your daughter. She's doing very well and her career is going gangbusters. You've been worrying for the last 86 years. Stop worrying, Bert. She's going to be on national news and everyone is going to know about her." He then said another prayer and left the room. I was alone with my mother. I was still seated across the room from her. Just looking at her and loving her, I was silent but sent her messages. "Mom, I'm really okay. You can go now. It's okay." Her breathing was still labored, but seemed to be a little softer. At first I thought I just imagined a change. Then as I continued to watch her chest, I could see that there was a definite change. She was not making the same effort. Mom was starting to let go. I continued to sit across from her. I looked at her lovingly and said, "You can do it, Mom. Let go. I'm so proud of you. Just let go." I knew my mother needed space to let go. I forced myself to stay across the room so that she could let go. "Mama, you can do it. Go, Mama, you can do it. You can do it." As her breathing became even softer, I added, "Mom, I'm so proud of you. Just let go, let go." After another 15 minutes, it looked as if Mom had passed the point of no return. Her breathing was very shallow and peaceful. I raced out to the nurse's station and told them Mom was passing. The nurse paged my children, and I ran back to Mom. I sat by her side and held her hand. She was passing slowly and peacefully. The nurses came in to check her pressure. They could hardly get a reading. My son and son-in-law stood by. I remained in this peaceful state for another 15 minutes, and during that time, my children left the room. I was alone with Mom. I wanted this to be my gift to my mother. I wanted to hold her hand as she passed. The intervals between her breaths were getting longer. I watched her chest rise and fall. Would this be her last breath? I was getting uncomfortable and anxious because of my expectations. I also wanted to be at peace as Mom passed. I decided to close my eyes and hold her hand. I didn't need to see her take her last breath. I needed to be with my mommy in a peaceful way. When I opened my eyes again, Mom had stopped breathing. It was over. I sat with Bert and continued to hold her hand. Time became timeless. When I was moved, I anointed her, and then I anointed myself. I asked my children to page the rabbi. He was the catalyst for Bert. I wanted to thank him. Bert passed at 12:30 p.m. I sat with her until 6:30 p.m. Something old and necessary was coming through. Sit with your mother. Do not leave her. My son-in-law thought that I was guarding the soul in the tradition of the Hasidic Jews. I just couldn't leave and wouldn't leave her. I continued with the intermittent anointing. During the hours that I stayed with Mom, my daughter and I observed an uncanny phenomenon. As the air escapes from the deceased, it appears as if they are once again breathing. My daughter and I looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" The rabbi later explained what was happening. My son used to read to Mom from a book that I had written. She enjoyed hearing my stories. I requested that the book be placed in her coffin along with her favorite blanket. When they arrived from the funeral home, we were both ready. Mom's body was starting to stiffen. She was warm where I had touched her, but the rest of her was getting cold. Her mouth was closing now. I kissed her several times and waited outside of her room. They were going to put Mom in a blue corduroy body bag. I didn't want to see her wheeled out in a body bag. I spared myself and waited by the nurse's station with no regrets. However, I just turned around as Mom was being wheeled out. One last look. Mom gave me the gift of time and hung on for 2 years. During these 2 years, we experienced a love that never before existed for us. My gift to my mother was to support her and love her as she passed. We were both blessed. We freed each other to be free of each other. Goodbye, Bert. Mom, I offer the foregoing writings as a tribute to you. I hope that together we have been able to help other struggling mothers and children. I love you. Your devoted daughter, Gloria Kaye.